Sometimes there's just not enough room for all the babies in the midst of intergalactic warfare. From altered villains to compressed timelines, here's how Dune Part 2 departed from its source material. Lady Jessica is significantly more cold and ruthless in Dune Part 2 than she is in the original novel. She's a bit of an antagonist, as she's the one actively radicalizing the Fremen towards her son Paul's divinity, hoping to use this as a way to control them. In both the film and the book, she's a member of the Bene Gesserit, a secretive group of powerful women with special abilities. They can use something called the Voice to control other people, and they train in a devastating martial art called the Weirding Way. The Bene Gesserit are also obsessed with political control. They've engineered specific bloodlines over generations to create the Kwisatz Haderach, a messianic figure that they can use to gain even more power. Over the course of centuries, the Bene Gesserit have seeded fake myths and prophecies around the universe to be exploited when the time is right. This includes the Lisan al-Gaib Messiah legend on Arrakis. After Lady Jessica takes over as the Reverend Mother of the Fremen in Dune Part 2, she uses this position to make sure that Paul gains absolute power. This is a departure from the book's more overtly maternal and relatively passive characterization of Jessica. In the original novel, Paul and his mother travel with the Fremen together rather than becoming separated for most of the story, like they do in Dune Part 2. This change works well for the film, as it greatly expands upon the subplot of the Bene Gesserit's use of false prophecies. In the movie, the Fremen are split into northern and southern tribes, with the southerners more religiously zealous than those from the north. Fremen leader Stilgar is from the south, and as such, he believes in Paul's divinity as Lisan al-Gaib almost immediately. Chani, meanwhile, is from the north, and is correspondingly much more skeptical. This narrative change allows for the internal struggles that Paul goes through in the book to be externalized and dramatized through the conflict with his mother and his fraught relationship with Chani. This departure also arguably improves Paul's character arc. In the book, he's understandably concerned about his destiny as an emperor who brings about an interstellar genocide, but he's not quite as reluctant as he is in the film. This makes it all the more tragic when he starts to realize that he can't escape his own dark destiny.
Consider what you're about to do, Paul Atreides.
Dune Part 2 also notably condenses the novel's timeline. About 2/3 of the way through the book, there's a multi-year time jump. This means that Lady Jessica has now given birth to a daughter named Alia. Paul and Chani grow closer during the time skip, and Chani also gives birth to a child, a son called Leto II, named after Paul's beloved father. But Dune Part 2 jettisons this time jump entirely, which is understandable for the sake of cinematic pacing. Some unfortunate cuts had to be made as a result, particularly those babies. It's easy to understand why the film was compressed in this way. But because the plot all takes place in a matter of months instead of years, it perhaps makes the Fremen's faith in Paul's divinity a little harder to believe. By far one of the biggest departures that Dune Part 2 makes from the novel is the exclusion of Paul's younger sister, Alia. After the time jump that happens in the book, she's able to walk around and talk like an adult, despite being only a few years old. This is because her mother drank the Fremen's water of life while she was pregnant. Alia, while she's still in the womb, gains the knowledge of every Reverend Mother that came before her. When she's finally born, she's referred to as preborn, meaning that even though she's an infant, she has adult memories and experiences. Alia's bizarre situation probably would have required a lot of exposition to work on screen. Not to mention, a little girl who acts like an adult can come across as rather goofy, as it unfortunately did in the 1984 adaptation of Dune, directed by David Lynch. Dune Part 2 gets around this in a clever way, as much of Alia's narrative purpose from the book is fulfilled while she's still in the womb, where she's voiced by Anya Taylor-Joy. She helps to radicalize Jessica and pushes Paul towards his destiny, or paving the way for her expanded role in a potential third Dune movie.
And I just love the idea to keep something like a surprise for the audience until the very end.
In addition to Alia, the other child born in the novel's time jump is Paul and Chani's son, Leto II. But he's nowhere to be seen or heard in Dune Part 2. In the book, however, he plays a huge role in his father's arc, as Leto is tragically killed, which understandably has a significant impact on Paul's mental state. At the end of the novel, before Paul and his Fremen army overwhelm Emperor Shaddam IV's forces on Arrakis, Paul receives a transmission informing him that Leto has died. It's heavily implied that this event is a serious tipping point for Paul, as his anger leads him to accept his destiny as a genocidal Muad'Dib. Because of the film's condensed time frame, it makes sense that Leto II's introduction and subsequent tragic death weren't included in the movie. The vicious Dune villain Baron Vladimir Harkonnen is perhaps most notable for his unique appearance. His overly rotund physique necessitates wearing high-tech floating devices called suspenders to move around at all. In all filmed versions, these belt-mounted suspenders also allow the Baron to hover menacingly in the air. However, he also possesses a ruthless political mind that allows him to plot multiple steps ahead of everyone else. In both Dune films, directed by Denis Villeneuve, Stellan Skarsgård plays a Baron with an extra amount of quiet menace that doesn't really exist in the books, where he's much more flamboyant. The Baron's role in the story as one of the primary antagonists who mainly operates in the background is true of both the book and the films. However, a big change is made on screen regarding the end of his story. This is because in the novel, the Baron is killed by Alia Atreides when she scratches and poisons him. However, due to the film's condensed timeline, Alia isn't around to kill him this time. So instead, Paul does the deed by brutally stabbing him in the neck. This is an understandable switch due to the other changes, and it offers more foreshadowing of Paul's inevitable moral descent. Fans of the novel were eager for Dune Part 2 to finally introduce Baron Harkonnen's vicious nephew, Feyd Rautha, who's played unforgettably by Austin Butler. It made sense for the 2021 Dune film not to include him, as his story doesn't start until the second half, but by March 2024, he was ready to fully emerge. Despite Butler's memorable performance, the film's characterization of Feyd Rautha is quite different from the book version. For one thing, his physical appearance is drastically altered, with author Frank Herbert describing him as a dark-haired youth of about 16 years, round of face and with sullen eyes. In the film, though, he seemingly aged up considerably, as the actor playing him is 32, and rather than sporting dark hair, he's bald and sickly pale.
I heard that the director told you that it described your character as a psychopath swordmaster mixed with Mick Jagger. Wow.
Even more extensive are the changes to Feyd Rautha's personality. He's much more aggressive and physically threatening, as evidenced when he beats up his brother Rabban in a scene created for the movie. Whereas in the book he's depicted as charismatic, conniving, and politically cunning. Also in the novel, he even almost outsmarts the Baron at one point in an attempted assassination plot, something that movie Feyd doesn't seem capable of. Another massive change that Dune Part 2 makes is a characterization of Chani. In the book, she's pretty much a devoted follower to Paul once they fall in love, and she remains so until the very end. While the book version of Chani initially has some trepidation about Paul's marriage with Princess Irulan, she's nonetheless aware of the political necessity of this decision, and she goes along with it without question. However, in the movie, Chani, as played by Zendaya, is much more rebellious and defiant, which makes sense for how the character was set up, even in the book. Fremen women are practically equal to the men in their society after all. They're expected to hunt, ride the giant sandworms, and collect water, so it makes sense that she would be so strong-willed and opinionated.
Every character in this wants something different. Everyone has different motives and different intentions.
Furthermore, unlike the Chani on the page, the movie version is aware of the Bene Gesserit's machinations. Or at the very least, she's suspicious of Paul's divinity and the validity of the Lisan al-Gaib myth, while also being aware of its use as colonial control. She even challenges Paul during his rousing speech to the Southern Fremen. At the end of the film, she understandably runs away after watching Paul propose to Irulan, with the last shot a close-up of her distraught face. There are many valid reasons for making changes when adapting a novel to a film. In the case of Dune, certain scenes were cut to save time. Some characters were deleted or composited to streamline the narrative, and events were modified for thematic clarity. Meanwhile, some other changes seem like they were made as a corrective to the original text. One such example is when loyal Atreides warrior turned spy smuggler Gurney Halleck takes his bloody revenge on Rabban the Beast Harkonnen by killing him during the film's final battle. This makes a lot of narrative sense, as it's explicitly stated that Rabban had tortured Gurney in the past, and that Rabban is the one who gave him his distinctive facial scar. Even in the book, Gurney wishes to take revenge on his former torturer. However, that vengeance never actually happens in the novel. Instead, Rabban is killed when the natives of Arrakis get sick of him and his Harkonnen thugs. This leads to them rioting and murdering him and his men. Admittedly, there's some poetic justice in Rabban being taken out by those that he's been mistreating, but it doesn't have quite the same impact as Gurney doing the job himself. As played by Florence Pugh, Princess Irulan is given a lot more to do in Dune Part 2 than in the entirety of the first novel. That's not necessarily saying much though. Before the final scene of the movie, she doesn't do very much either, besides walk around the castle on her home planet. She also talks to her father, Emperor Shaddam IV, as well as the other Bene Gesserit, including Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, who are all conspiring against the Atreides. Meanwhile, in the book, Princess Irulan does even less than that. She isn't even physically mentioned until the very end, when she arrives on Arrakis with her father in his makeshift throne room before Paul raids her. She's also cited in the book as the author of various historical and biographical accounts of Muad'Dib, with glimpses of that provided at the start of each chapter. This is a smart and welcome change. Irulan isn't important in the first book, except as a plot device to allow Paul to ascend the throne in a final act of revenge against her father. But she's an extremely important character in the sequel Dune Messiah, which Denis Villeneuve has expressed interest in directing. It also allows her to be a conduit for other characters to spout important exposition, which is expressed mostly in inner monologues in the book.
She ends the movie on a ... and that is just the most thrilling thing as an actor.